I always try and sort of temper my wet blanket, I guess, tendencies in situations like this. And so let me just get this out of the way. Tim Walz is not perfect. There is no politician that is perfect. Within the context of the various picks that were available, or I should say that were in contention, I think Tim Walz was the best. Again, he's not perfect, but no politician is. And he has he's done a lot of great things in Minnesota, and a couple of things that aren't great, but a lot more great things. And he has done so with a 1-seat majority in the Senate. There's a lot of different ways in which to analyze this pick, both in terms of does he help electorally and how? Also, what does he say about Kamala Harris's agenda? What does he say about Kamala Harris's perspective on what she's going to face if she does win? What does his pick, as opposed to other picks that were possible, say about the power that progressives have now within the Democratic coalition? And let's just start with some of the basics about Walz. Like I say, elected to governor in 2018, started serving in 2019. Prior to that, he was a congressman in a substantially red district. I think that district now just went for Trump in 2020 by 15 points. He was there for 12 years. When he ran in 2006, he appeared on the Majority Report. At that time when we were on Air America.
Wow, I didn't know this.
We had a program that we were doing with Marcus Malitzis of the Daily Kos called The Fighting Dems. Remember, this was an election in 2006 that we wanted to make about being against the Iraq War. Now, I think that was a big part of it in terms of Congress. A bigger part was maybe the fact that, it turned out that multiple members of the Republican leadership were covering up a congressman who was preying on some congressional interns. But be that as it may, he came on, he was a vet, and maybe he may have been active duty or at least a reservist at that time, if I remember correctly now. He was a National Guardsman. He ended up being the highest ranking active duty, because of his reservist, military person to serve in Congress. He sat on the Veterans Affairs Committee. He sat on the Ag Committee in Congress. He also got a waiver so that he could sit on the Armed Services Committee. He voted against the Iraq War in 2007. Yeah, I should say he voted to withdraw in 2007. He also, though, voted for the 2007 Iraq War supplemental monies for the military there. He entered politics. This is what was interesting. He was a football coach and a teacher. He taught in China at one point. He taught for high school. When he got back from, or I guess became a reservist and was no longer active duty, after 9/11, he served in Italy and apparently helped coordinate things happening in Afghanistan. He took his students to a Bush rally as a civics lesson. One of the kids apparently had a Kerry sticker on their person or on something they were carrying. And so they were not allowed to go into the rally. This was a practice at that time by the Bush people. And this is presumably in 2004 against Kerry. And that made him decide, I need to run for Congress. Another story I have read is that local Democrats And we should say in Minnesota, it's not the Democratic Party, it's the Democrat Farmer Labor Party, DFL. They found Walz and they were very excited about him to run because he was a teacher, was very civic minded, had this military background, could speak against the Iraq War. Rahm Emanuel, who was at that time head of the DCCC, did not want him as the candidate because he couldn't self-fund. That was Rahm Emanuel's, among other things, that was one of his pet projects, getting people to pay, having only wealthy people. Let's go through, once he was elected governor in 2020, or I should say in the wake of the 2020 election, was it in 2020 or 2021? When the Minnesota got the state house flipped. I think it was in 22. With a 1-seat majority in the Minnesota Senate, they passed paid and family sick leave. Not a perfect paid and family sick leave. We'll get into the details of that, but better than the one the rest of us have. Again, that was after 2022 midterms. They passed abortion protections. They passed a child tax credit, which severely cut down on poverty in that state. They, in terms of labor, they nixed non-compete clauses. They allowed for sectoral bargaining amongst nurses. They allowed teachers to negotiate class size. They banned captive meetings where management would use to union bust. They passed protections for meat packers and construction workers. They passed free breakfast and lunch in Minnesota schools. They protected gender-affirming care and banned conversion therapy. They legalized pot. They did automatic voter registration. They restored voting rights to well over 100,000 felons. They increased education funding and expanded pre-K. They passed undocumented immigrants to getting licenses. They funded affordable housing. They banned junk fees. There were a couple of negatives. They weakened some of the pay standards in Uber and Lyft after the minimum wage was passed. And that was on Walz. They gave the Mayo Clinic a little bit of a waiver on some nursing standards. But net, that would be a big achievement if we could do that nationally. On foreign policy, basically replacement level Democrat. Spoke at AIPAC in 2010, has been for a two-state solution. He didn't necessarily agree with uncommitted, but praised their ability to vote and praised it as opposed to going after people who were protesting it. He supported the 2015 nuke deal while in Congress. On balance, a pretty progressive pick.
Yeah.
And it will, and we'll talk more about this in the days to come. I'm sure Emma is chomping at the bit to talk about this, but she, Emma's talked about what we know about Kamala Harris's agenda going forward. And if this pick is any indication, she is clearly not running away from the ideas that were in Build Back Better, because what he managed to pass in Minnesota was a Build Back Better type of bill. And, in some instances, the numbers were compatible, but broadly speaking, this indicates a couple of things. She's not going to run away from that. Will she be able to achieve it? Who knows? She also expects that if she's in a position of winning, she is not going to have a huge majority. She also savvy enough to know, having a 12-year veteran from Congress to go in there, a guy who was apparently very popular, to get that waiver and sit on both those military committees, big deal. He was presumably supported by Nancy Pelosi as well as Bernie Sanders. So this is a pick that also contemplates maybe a role for him in the governing going forward. Sending someone, this is what Biden supposedly did for Obama. Now, when Biden went to the Senate, he usually gave away the store. Walz does not seem like someone who is prepared to do that in the same way. This is the part that I really like about Walz. All these policies are there. It's clear that he was willing to put himself on the line politically in a state where there was a 1-vote margin, a 1-vote majority. That means he is not timid in those type of situations. And you can see his partisanship, which is an important thing that we have not had in the Democratic Party. The idea that we have good ideas. Maybe those ideas are not as good as I would want them or you would want them, but his ideas are pretty good, particularly for Democrats. But we don't need to be afraid of those ideas. We don't need to compromise on those principles, because when we articulate those principles and the Republicans say they're against them, they look like lunatics. Here is Walz. This is from a couple of weeks ago. I think we probably played this at the time. I don't know if we did, with Jake Tapper. This was on, I guess it was just about a week ago. And this is how Walz is going to respond when he gets attacked. Now, remember, Kamala Harris, these guys had basically a public job interviews, right? Where they're going out and showing, this is what I'll be like. If Harris doesn't want this, she wouldn't have picked him. Play this clip.
But you've legalized recreational marijuana, you passed universal background checks on guns, you expanded LGBTQ protections, you implemented tuition-free college for low-income Minnesotans. There's free breakfast and lunch for school kids. Do you think your record is an asset to the ticket, or would it risk fueling Trump's attacks as you being a big government liberal?
What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn, and women are making their own healthcare decisions. And we're a top 5 business state, and we also rank in the top 3 of happiness. Look, they're going to label whatever they're going to label. He's going to roll it out, mispronounce names, to try and make the case. The fact of the matter is, where you see the policies that Vice President Harris was a part of making, Democratic governors across the country executed those policies, and quality of life is higher. The economies are better. All of those things. Educational attainment is better. So, yeah, my kids are going to eat here, and you're going to have a chance to go to college, and you're going to have an opportunity to live where we're working on reducing carbon emissions. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have personal incomes that are higher, and you're going to have health insurance. So if that's where they want to label me, I'm more than happy to take the label.
I mean, that is 10 for 10 as a political matter. 10 for 10. I forgot to mention the college tuition and the carbon emission standards for 2030. It doesn't get much better than that in terms of an elected politician in this country. That is, that's largely the type of, at least, response that we would hear from someone like Bernie Sanders or from, non-80-year-old Democratic politicians who entered politics in the early 90s or in the 80s or in the wake of the McGovern loss in the early 70s, and always tried to find a clever way of seeming like they weren't too strident, seeming like they didn't embrace these policies, which are unequivocally good policies. And that's the way you talk about these things. You don't You don't try and split the difference on abortion. You don't try and split the difference on LGBTQ rights. You don't do it. You challenge the Republicans, these weirdos, to try and make their case that their vision for America is better. And they can't do it. They simply can't do it. When they open their mouths, and we've seen it over the past couple of weeks, when they open their mouths to try and justify their policy positions, they just sound weirder to normal people. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.